Relax with stories that help you sleep, work, and calm your mind. Today's story is called Wedding Party Encounter. We invite you to listen and support our channel by clicking subscribe and receiving channel notifications to conveniently follow the next videos. Sincerely thank you. The grand ballroom of the Magnolia Estate in Charleston, South Carolina, shimmered under a cascade of golden chandeliers, their light dancing across crystal flutes and polished silverware. Outside, the low-country evening draped the world in velvet dusk, the air thick with the scent of jasmine and magnolia blossoms. Vines of white roses climbed the trellises, framing the open French doors that led to a sprawling garden where fireflies flickered like tiny stars. Inside, the wedding reception pulsed with laughter, clinking glasses, and the soulful hum of a jazz quartet weaving through the crowd. The bride and groom, radiant in their love, floated across the dance floor, drawing every eye. But at the far edge of the room, tucked at a table draped in ivory linens, two souls sat apart from the revelry, as if the celebration belonged to another world. Isabelle Tran leaned back in her chair, her fingers idly tracing the stem of a half-empty wine glass. At 27, she was a vision of understated elegance, though she'd barely glanced in the mirror before leaving her hotel room. Her midnight black hair fell in loose waves over her bare shoulders, catching the chandelier light in glossy ripples. The emerald green silk dress she wore hugged her slender frame, its neckline dipping just low enough to reveal the delicate curve of her collarbone, kissed by a faint summer tan. Her almond-shaped eyes, dark and liquid, flickered with a mix of melancholy and defiance as she scanned the room. She was here for her best friend, the bride, but her heart wasn't in it. 3 months ago, her world had cracked open when her fiancé of 4 years confessed he'd fallen out of love. The breakup had left her raw, her confidence frayed, and tonight she'd come to the wedding out of duty, not joy. She felt like a ghost drifting through someone else's dream, her smile a carefully practiced mask. Across the table, Nathan Brooks sat with the kind of effortless poise that drew eyes without trying. At 32, he was a study in contrasts, polished yet untamed, distant yet magnetic. His tailored navy suit clung to his broad shoulders and tapered down to a lean waist, hinting at a body sculpted by discipline, perhaps hours spent running or lifting weights to quiet a restless mind. His jawline was sharp, dusted with a shadow of stubble that suggested he'd skipped a shave, not out of carelessness, but as if he'd decided perfection was overrated. His hair, dark brown and slightly tousled, fell just long enough to brush the collar of his crisp white shirt, unbuttoned at the top to reveal a sliver of tanned skin. But it was his eyes that stopped, heart storm gray, piercing, and impossibly expressive. They seemed to hold secrets he'd never share. A colleague of the groom, Nathan had arrived alone, his presence a quiet favor rather than a celebration. He wasn't one for weddings, with their forced cheer and predictable rituals, but something about tonight felt different, like the air held a charge he couldn't name. The table they shared was a haven for misfit single friends, distant cousins, and plus ones who didn't quite fit the inner circle. Isabelle and Nathan hadn't spoken, hadn't even acknowledged each other beyond a polite nod when they'd taken their seats. Yet, as the evening wore on, their gazes began to drift, like moths drawn to a flame neither could see. Isabelle noticed him first, her eyes catching the way his long fingers toyed with the rim of his whiskey glass, the faint crease of a smile when he overheard a guest's bad joke. There was something about him, something guarded yet alive, like a man who'd learned to hide his fire but couldn't douse it entirely. She wondered what his voice sounded like, whether it matched the quiet intensity of his presence. Nathan, for his part, had been aware of her from the moment he sat down. It wasn't just her beauty, though she was undeniably striking. It was the way she carried herself, poised yet fragile, like a porcelain vase with a hairline crack. Her lips, full and painted a soft rose, curved into a half-smile that didn't reach her eyes, and he found himself wondering what had dimmed her light. When she crossed her legs, the slit in her dress parted to reveal a glimpse of her thigh, smooth and golden, and he forced himself to look away, his pulse quickening. He wasn't here to chase distractions, but she was no ordinary distraction. She was a puzzle, and Nathan had always been drawn to things he couldn't immediately solve. The jazz quartet shifted into a slower, sultrier melody, and the MC's voice crackled through the speakers, inviting guests to join the bride and groom on the dance floor. Couples rose, their laughter bright, while Isabelle and Nathan remained rooted, their eyes locked in a silent conversation neither dared to voice. The air between them thickened, charged with possibility. Isabelle's heart gave a traitorous flutter as she caught the faintest tilt of Nathan's head, his gaze holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. It wasn't a stare, it was a question, a challenge, a spark. She broke the contact first, glancing down at her wine glass, her cheeks warming. What was she doing? She wasn't here to flirt, to feel whatever this was. But when she looked up again, Nathan was still watching her, his lips parting as if he might speak. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, his voice low and smooth, cutting through the din like a blade. "Do you ever feel like you're watching someone else's life unfold?" he asked, his tone casual but laced with something deeper, something that invited her to peel back the surface. Isabelle's lips twitched, a real smile threatening to break through. "All the time," she admitted, her voice soft but steady. "Especially tonight." He nodded, as if her answer confirmed something he'd already suspected. "Me too," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "But I'm starting to think maybe we're not just spectators." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Isabelle's pulse raced, her skin tingling as if his gaze had brushed against it. She didn't know his name, didn't know his story, but in that moment, she felt seen, truly seen for the first time in months. And Nathan, watching the way her eyes softened, the way her fingers tightened around her glass, knew he was treading dangerous ground. He wasn't a man who believed in fate, but something about her made him want to rewrite his rules. Around them, the wedding spun, glasses clinked, dresses swirled, and the jazz notes curled like smoke. But at the edge of it all, two strangers sat on the cusp of something new, their hearts beating in time with a rhythm neither could name. The night was young, and the air was alive with promise. The Magnolia Estates ballroom seemed to exhale as the jazz quartet slipped into a slow, honeyed rendition of "At Last." The notes curled through the air, rich and languid, wrapping the crowd in a spell of romance. The dance floor, polished to a mirror sheen, reflected the golden glow of chandeliers and the swaying silhouettes of couples. The bride and groom, lost in each other, moved as if the world had faded away, their love a beacon that drew every guest to their feet. The MC's voice, warm and coaxing, floated over the music, urging everyone to join the slow dance. "Come on now," he said, a smile in his tone. "This one's for the dreamers, the lovers, and the ones who might just fall tonight. At the edge of the room, Isabelle Tran sat frozen, her heart a quiet drumbeat against the tide of the music. The emerald silk of her dress shimmered as she shifted, the fabric clinging to her curves like a lover's touch. Her legs, crossed elegantly, revealed a sliver of thigh through the dress's high slit, her skin glowing under the soft light. She felt the weight of the moment, the pull of the dance floor, but her body resisted. She wasn't here to lose herself, not after the heartbreak, not after months of piecing herself back together. Yet her eyes betrayed her, darting to Nathan Brooks, who sat across the table, his presence like a magnet she couldn't ignore. Nathan's storm gray eyes were already on her, steady and unyielding, as if he'd been waiting for this exact moment. His navy suit jacket hung open, the white shirt beneath stretched taut across his chest, hinting at the lean muscle beneath. His tie was loosened just enough to suggest he didn't care for convention, and the faint stubble along his jaw caught the light, giving him an edge that was both rugged and refined. His fingers, long and deft, rested on the table, one tapping lightly to the rhythm of the music, a subtle sign that he wasn't as detached as he seemed. When their gazes locked, the air between them crackled, a silent conversation that needed no words. Isabelle's breath hitched, her lips parting slightly as she felt the heat of his stare trace her face, her neck, the delicate dip of her collarbone exposed by her dress. It was as if he could see through her carefully crafted walls, straight to the woman she'd buried beneath her pain. Nathan leaned forward, his voice low, a velvet rumble that sent a shiver down her spine. "I don't usually dance," he said, his lips curving into a half smile that was equal parts charm and challenge. "But tonight, I think I'd regret it if I didn't ask you." He stood, his movements fluid, and extended a hand toward her. "Will you?" Isabelle's heart stuttered. His hand, strong and steady, hovered before her, an invitation to step into the unknown. She glanced at it, then back to his face, searching those gray eyes for a reason to say no. But all she found was a spark of promise of something reckless, something alive. Her fingers trembled as she placed them in his palm, her skin electric where it met his. His grip was warm, firm, and as he drew her to her feet, she felt a rush of adrenaline, like stepping off a cliff into a sea of stars. The dance floor was a mosaic of twirling dresses and murmured laughter, but as Nathan led her to its center, the world narrowed to just the two of them. The music swelled, Etta James's voice, a sultry caress, and Nathan's hand settled at the small of Isabelle's back, his touch light but commanding. Her breath caught as his fingers brushed the bare skin just above her dress's low backline, sending a ripple of warmth through her. She placed her free hand on his shoulder, feeling the taut muscle beneath his suit, the quiet strength that made her want to lean closer. Their bodies aligned, close enough for her to catch the faint scent of his cologne sandalwood and cedar, earthy and intoxicating. "I should warn you," Nathan murmured, his breath grazing her ear as they began to sway. "I'm not exactly Fred Astaire." His voice held a self-deprecating humor, but his eyes told a different story, gleaming with a confidence that made her pulse race. Isabelle laughed softly, the sound surprising her with its lightness. "Good," she said, tilting her head to meet his gaze. "I'd rather dance with someone real." Her lips curved into a teasing smile, and she felt a thrill as his eyes darkened, a flicker of desire passing through them. They moved together, tentative at first, their steps a cautious exploration. Nathan's hand guided her with subtle pressure, his fingers splaying wider against her back as they found their rhythm. Isabelle's body responded instinctively, her hips swaying in time with his, the silk of her dress whispering against her skin. Her breasts, softly outlined by the dress's fitted bodice, brushed against his chest as they turned, and she felt a flush creep up her neck, her body waking to his nearness. His thigh grazed hers through the slit in her dress, a fleeting contact that sent a jolt of heat through her core. She glanced up, catching the way his jaw tightened, the muscle flexing as if he, too, felt the spark. "You're better at this than you let on," she said, her voice a little breathless, her fingers tightening on his shoulder. His suit jacket was smooth under her touch, but she imagined the warmth of his skin beneath, the hard planes of his body she could only guess at. Nathan's smile was slow, almost wicked. Maybe I just needed the right partner. His hand slid an inch lower, resting at the curve of her waist, his thumb brushing the silk in a way that felt deliberate, possessive. Isabelle's heart pounded, her body humming with a need she hadn't felt in months. She tilted her head back slightly, exposing the slender column of her throat, and his gaze followed, lingering on the delicate pulse point where her skin shimmered with a faint sheen of warmth. The music seemed to slow, or perhaps it was the world itself, bending to the gravity of their dance. Their steps grew bolder, their bodies closer, until there was barely space for air between them. Isabelle's fingers slid from his shoulder to the nape of his neck, grazing the soft hair there, and she felt him tense, his breath catching. His hand tightened on her waist, pulling her flush against him for a moment, and she gasped softly, her lips parting as she felt the hard length of his body against hers. His chest was a solid wall, his hips a subtle counterpoint to her own, and the heat of him seeped through her dress, igniting something deep within her. "Do you feel that?" Nathan whispered, his voice rougher now, his lips so close to her ear that she felt the warmth of his breath. "Like we're the only ones here?" Isabelle nodded, her throat tight. "Yes," she managed, her voice barely audible. She felt exposed, vulnerable, but also alive in a way she hadn't thought possible. Her fingers curled into his hair, and she tilted her face up, their lips inches apart. His eyes searched hers, a storm of want and restraint, and for a moment she thought he might kiss her right there, in the middle of the dance floor, under the watchful eyes of 100 strangers. But he didn't. Instead, he spun her gently, his hand never leaving her waist, and when she came back to him, her body pressed closer, her cheek brushing his jaw. The stubble there was a delicious rasp against her skin, and she imagined how it would feel elsewhere: her lips, her throat, the sensitive curve of her shoulder. Her breasts ached against the confines of her dress, her nipples tightening as they grazed his chest, and she bit her lip to stifle a sound. Nathan's hand flexed against her back, his fingers digging in just enough to tell her. He felt it, tooth pull, the heat, the unspoken promise of what could come next. The song ended too soon, the final notes fading into applause and laughter. They stilled, their bodies still entwined, neither willing to break the spell. Isabelle's chest rose and fell, her breath mingling with his, and she felt the rapid beat of his heart beneath her palm, now resting on his chest. His hand lingered at her waist, his thumb tracing a slow circle that made her skin tingle. "Another dance?" he asked, his voice a low growl that sent a shiver through her. Isabelle smiled, her eyes gleaming with a mix of mischief and longing. "Maybe later," she said, stepping back just enough to feel the loss of his warmth. "I think I need a drink first." Nathan's lips twitched, a spark of amusement in his eyes. "Then let's find you one," he said, offering his arm. As she took it, her fingers brushing the hard muscle beneath his sleeve, she felt a surge of anticipation. The night was unfolding, and with every step, they were writing a story that felt like it had always been waiting to begin. The night air was a soft caress as Isabelle and Nathan stepped out of the Magnolia Estates ballroom into the garden, where the wedding's glow spilled into the darkness. Lanterns hung from ancient oaks, their amber light casting a warm halo over the cobblestone path that wound through blooming camellias and ivy-draped trellises. The jazz quartet's melody faded to a distant hum, replaced by the rustle of leaves and the faint chirp of crickets. The garden felt like a secret world, a place where time slowed and the rules of the ordinary didn't apply. Isabelle's emerald silk dress caught the lantern light, the fabric shimmering with each step, clinging to her curves like a second skin. Her bare shoulders gleamed, kissed by the humid low-country air, and her dark hair swayed, loose waves brushing the nape of her neck. She felt alive, her skin tingling from the dance, from Nathan's touch, from the unspoken promise that hung between them. Nathan walked beside her, his navy suit jacket now draped over one shoulder, the white shirt beneath, unbuttoned at the collar to reveal a tantalizing glimpse of his tanned chest. His stride was confident, his lean frame moving with a predator's grace, but there was a softness in the way he glanced at her, as if she were a puzzle he was savoring rather than solving. His storm-gray eyes caught the light, their intensity softened by a flicker of curiosity, and the faint stubble along his jaw gave him a rugged edge that made Isabelle's pulse quicken. She imagined running her fingers along that jaw, feeling the rough texture against her skin, and the thought sent a flush of heat through her. They reached a small outdoor bar tucked beneath a pergola draped in wisteria, its wooden counter lit by a string of Edison bulbs that swayed gently in the breeze. The bartender, a young man with a quick smile, was pouring ruby-red wine into glasses for a handful of guests who'd escaped the ballroom's clamor. Isabelle and Nathan settled onto high stools, their knees brushing as they faced each other, the contact sending a spark through her. The bar was intimate, the space between them charged with a quiet electricity. She crossed her legs, the slit in her dress parting to reveal the smooth curve of her thigh, and she caught Nathan's gaze linger there for a moment before he met her eyes, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Wine?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through her. "Or something stronger?" Isabelle tilted her head, her lips curving into a teasing smile. "Wine," she said. "Red. Something bold." Her voice was soft but deliberate, and she held his gaze, feeling a thrill at the way his eyes darkened, as if her words were a challenge he was eager to meet. Nathan signaled the bartender, ordering 2 glasses of a Napa Valley Cabernet, his tone smooth and assured. As they waited, he leaned closer, his elbow resting on the counter, his body angled toward her. The scent of his cologne is sandalwood and cedar, warm and earthy, wrapped around her, and she inhaled deeply, her senses sharpening. His forearm, exposed where he'd rolled up his sleeve, was corded with muscle, the veins faintly visible beneath his tanned skin, and she imagined tracing them with her fingertips, feeling the pulse beneath. His hands, strong and elegant, rested near hers, and she noticed the calluses on his palms, a hint of a life that wasn't all polished suits and corporate meetings. The bartenders slid their glasses across the counter, the wine catching the light like liquid garnet. Nathan raised his glass, his eyes locked on hers. "To strangers," he said, his voice laced with a wry humor that made her heart skip. "And to nights that make us forget we ever were." Isabelle clinked her glass against his, her smile widening. "To nights we'll never forget," she countered, her voice a sultry whisper. She took a sip, the wine rich and velvety on her tongue, its warmth spreading through her chest. Nathan watched her, his gaze lingering on her lips as she licked a stray drop from them, and she felt a delicious heat coil in her belly, her body responding to the unspoken desire in his eyes. They sipped in silence for a moment, the garden's quiet enveloping them. Then Isabelle spoke, her voice soft, almost hesitant. "I wasn't supposed to feel like this tonight," she admitted, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. "I came here to prove I could still show up, after everything." She glanced at him, her dark eyes vulnerable, and the words spilled out before she could stop them. "My ex-fiancé left me 3 months ago, said he didn't love me anymore, and I've been trying to figure out who I am without him." Nathan's expression softened, but there was no pity in his eyes, only understanding. He leaned closer, his knee brushing hers again, the contact grounding her. "I get it," he said, his voice low and steady. "More than you know." He paused, swirling the wine in his glass, his gaze distant for a moment. "I've spent years running from a life someone else planned for me. Corporate job, corner office, the whole script. It's what I was supposed to want. But it felt like a cage." He met her eyes, his stare piercing. "Tonight's the first time in a long time I felt free." Isabelle's breath caught, her heart aching at the raw honesty in his words. She saw herself in him, the restlessness, the search for something real. "What do you do when you're not playing the part?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathan's lips twitched, a spark of mischief in his eyes. "I run, miles and miles, until my lungs burn and my head's clear. I read old books, the kind with dog-eared pages, and sometimes," he leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur, "I sneak into places like this and pretend I belong." She laughed, the sound bright and unguarded, and it felt like a release, like shedding a weight she'd carried too long. "You're terrible at pretending," she teased, nudging his knee with hers. "You stand out too much." His smile was slow, devastating. "So do you," he said, his gaze sweeping over her, lingering on the curve of her lips, the delicate slope of her neck, the way her dress hugged her waist. "That dress, it's like it was made to make people jealous." Isabelle's cheeks flushed, but she held his gaze, emboldened by the wine and the heat in his eyes. "Maybe I wanted to feel beautiful tonight," she said, her voice a sultry challenge. "Maybe I needed to remember I could." Nathan's eyes darkened, his hand inching closer to hers on the counter, his fingers brushing the back of her wrist. The touch was featherlight, but it sent a jolt through her, her skin prickling with awareness. "You don't need a dress for that," he murmured, his voice rough with something that made her heart race. "But damn, you wear it like a weapon." Her lips parted, a soft gasp escaping her, and she felt her body lean toward him, drawn by a force she couldn't resist. His thumb grazed her wrist, tracing the delicate veins there, and she imagined those fingers elsewhere sliding up her arm, tangling in her hair, pressing against the small of her back. Her breasts, softly outlined by the dress, felt heavy, her nipples tightening under the silk, and she shifted slightly, the movement drawing his gaze to the neckline that dipped low, revealing the swell of her chest. His jaw clenched, a muscle ticking, and she knew he was fighting the same pull she felt. They talked for hours, the wine loosening their tongues, the night deepening around them. Isabelle told him about her love for painting, how she'd stopped after the breakup, her canvases gathering dust in her apartment. Nathan confessed his secret obsession with jazz, how he'd taught himself to play the saxophone late at night when the world was quiet. They laughed, their voices mingling, their bodies inching closer, until their thighs pressed together, the heat of his leg seeping through her dress. When the conversation turned to the wedding, they discovered a shared disdain for the traditional keikia cloying vanilla confection that had left them both unimpressed. "Too sweet," Isabelle said, wrinkling her nose, "like it's trying too hard." Nathan grinned, his eyes crinkling. "Exactly. Give me chocolate, or nothing at all." "Chocolate with a hint of sea salt," she added, her voice playful. "Something that bites back." His laugh was low, rich, and it sent a shiver through her. "Your trouble," he said, but his tone was warm, admiring. He reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers, and the simple act felt intimate, electric. His palm was warm, his grip firm, and she imagined those hands exploring her, learning her curves, coaxing soft gasps from her lips. As the night wore on, the garden grew quieter, the other guests drifting back to the ballroom or retiring to their rooms. The bartender began to clean up, but Isabelle and Nathan lingered, reluctant to break the spell. The lanterns above them flickered, casting shadows that danced across Nathan's face, highlighting the sharp angle of his cheekbones, the curve of his lips. Isabelle's heart pounded, her body humming with a need she couldn't ignore. She wanted to know him, his taste, his touch, the sound of his voice when it was rough with desire. And from the way his eyes roamed her, the way his thumb traced slow circles on her hand, she knew he wanted the same. "Should we go back inside?" she asked, her voice a husky whisper, but her eyes said something else entirely. Nathan's gaze held hers, intense and searching. "Not yet," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. "I'm not ready to share you with the world." Her breath hitched, her body leaning closer until their faces were inches apart. She could see the flecks of silver in his eyes, the faint scar above his eyebrow, the way his lips parted, as if he were about to speak or kiss her. The air between them was thick, heavy with anticipation, and she felt a delicious ache in her core, her body craving the weight of his against hers. The night was theirs, and the garden was their sanctuary. Whatever came next, they were ready to fall. The garden of the Magnolia estate had grown hushed, the last strains of jazz from the ballroom swallowed by the night's embrace. The air was heavy with the scent of blooming jasmine and the faint salt of the nearby Charleston harbor, a sultry breeze stirring the leaves overhead. Lanterns swayed gently, their golden glow casting fleeting shadows across the cobblestone path where Isabelle Tran and Nathan Brooks stood, their bodies close, their hands still entwined from the bar. The wedding's energy pulsed faintly behind them, but here, in this pocket of the world, it was just the two of them, two strangers who felt anything but. Isabelle's emerald silk dress shimmered in the dim light, the fabric molding to her lithe frame, accentuating the gentle curve of her hips and the delicate swell of her breasts. Her dark hair, loose and tousled from the night's heat, framed her face, strands catching the lantern light like threads of obsidian. Her skin, kissed by the low country's warmth, glowed with a soft sheen, and her almond-shaped eyes, dark and luminous, held a mix of anticipation and vulnerability that made Nathan's chest tighten. Nathan stood mere inches away, his navy suit jacket now slung over his arm, the white shirt beneath unbuttoned at the collar to reveal a tantalizing glimpse of his tanned chest. The shirt clung to his broad shoulders and lean torso, hinting at the sculpted muscle beneath the body, honed by restless energy, perhaps long runs under dawn skies or quiet hours in a gym, chasing clarity. His dark brown hair was slightly disheveled, a lock falling over his forehead, and the stubble along his jaw gave him a rugged allure, softened only by the storm-gray eyes that seemed to see straight through her. His presence was magnetic, a blend of restraint and raw intensity, and the way his gaze roamed her lingering on the curve of her lips, the slender column of her throat sent a shiver down her spine. His hand, still holding hers, was warm and strong, the calluses on his palm, a tactile reminder of a life lived beyond the polished surface he presented. They had lingered at the garden bar until the bartender began to pack up, their conversation a tapestry of shared confessions and playful banter, woven with glances that grew bolder, touches that lingered longer. The wine had loosened their inhibitions, but it was something deeper, mutual recognition of two souls adrift, finding anchor in each other that kept them rooted in the moment. Now, as they stood on the path, the night seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what came next. Isabelle's heart pounded, her body humming with a need she couldn't name, her skin prickling where his thumb grazed her knuckles. She felt exposed, alive, and utterly captivated by the man before her, whose every look seemed to unravel her carefully guarded heart. A sudden burst of sound shattered the quiet a low boom, followed by a cascade of light as the first firework exploded overhead. The sky ignited in a shower of gold and crimson, sparks raining down like molten stars. The wedding guests, scattered across the lawn and spilling out from the ballroom, let out cheers and gasps, their faces tilted upward. The display was the night's crescendo, a spectacle to mark the bride and groom's union. But for Isabelle and Nathan, it was something else entirely, a backdrop to a moment that felt like it belonged only to them. Nathan's eyes flicked to the sky, then back to Isabelle, a slow smile curving his lips. "Perfect timing," he murmured, his voice a low, velvet rumble that sent a thrill through her. He stepped closer, closing the small distance between them, his body a warm, solid presence. "Come on," he said, tugging gently at her hand. "Let's get a better view." He led her down the path to a small clearing near the garden's edge, where the oak trees parted to reveal a sweeping view of the sky. The grass was soft under Isabelle's heels, and she kicked them off without a second thought, her bare feet sinking into the cool earth. The gesture was impulsive, unguarded, and Nathan's eyes followed, his gaze lingering on her slender ankles, the graceful arch of her feet, before traveling up her legs, where the slit in her dress revealed a glimpse of her thigh, smooth and golden. His jaw tightened, a flicker of desire passing through his eyes, and Isabelle felt a flush creep up her neck, her body responding to the heat in his stare. They stopped in the clearing, standing side by side, their shoulders brushing as they looked up at the sky. Fireworks bloomed in rapid succession: emerald green, sapphire blue, fiery orange, each explosion painting their faces in shifting hues. The air crackled with energy, the booms reverberating in Isabelle's chest, mirroring the wild rhythm of her heart. Nathan's hand found hers again, his fingers intertwining with hers, and the simple touch felt like a lifeline, grounding her in the chaos of light and sound. She glanced at him, catching the way the fireworks reflected in his eyes, turning them into pools of silver and gold. His profile was striking sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, lips that seemed made for both whispers and sins. She wanted to trace that jaw with her fingertips, to feel the stubble rasp against her skin, to know the taste of those lips. "Do you believe in moments?" Nathan asked suddenly, his voice soft but clear, cutting through the din. He turned to face her, his eyes searching hers, the fireworks casting shadows across his face. "Moments that change everything?" Isabel's breath caught, her lips parting as she met his gaze. "I didn't," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not until tonight." The words felt like a confession, raw and unguarded, and she saw something shift in his eyes, a spark of recognition, of want. He stepped closer, his body now fully facing hers, the heat of him seeping through the thin space between them. "We're just two strangers," he said, his voice rougher now, laced with an intensity that made her pulse race. "Two people who didn't plan to be here, didn't plan to feel this. But right now," he reached out, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face, tucking it behind her ear. The touch was gentle, but it sent a jolt through her skin tingling where his fingers grazed her cheek. "Right now, we could be something special, just for tonight." Isabel's heart stuttered, her body leaning toward him as if drawn by gravity. His words were a spell, weaving around her, and she felt the truth of them in her bones. She didn't know his last name, didn't know his past, but she knew the way his touch made her feel alive, desired, whole. Her eyes flicked to his lips, full and slightly parted, and she imagined how they would feel against hers, soft yet demanding, warm yet searing. Her breasts, pressed against the silk of her dress, felt heavy, her nipples tightening as a breeze brushed her bare shoulders, and she saw his gaze dip to the neckline, lingering on the delicate curve of her collarbone, the swell of her chest, his jaw clenched, a muscle ticking, and she knew he was fighting the same urge she felt to close the distance, to surrender. The sky erupted in a finale of fireworks, a symphony of light and sound that shook the air. Gold and silver sparks rained down, illuminating them in a cascade of brilliance, and Isabel felt a surge of recklessness, a need to seize this moment before it slipped away. She stepped closer, her body brushing his, the silk of her dress whispering against his shirt. Her hand found his chest, her palm pressing against the hard plane of muscle, feeling the rapid beat of his heart beneath. His breath hitched, his eyes darkening as he looked down at her, and she saw the question in his gaze, the restraint holding him back. "Nathan," she whispered, his name a soft plea on her lips, and it was all the permission he needed. He cupped her face with both hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones, and leaned in, his lips capturing hers in a kiss that was both tender and fierce. The world fell away, the fireworks, the cheers, the night itself, leaving only the heat of his mouth, the press of his body, the rush of desire that consumed her. His lips were warm, tasting of wine and something uniquely him, and they moved with a slow, deliberate hunger, coaxing a soft moan from her throat. She melted into him, her hands sliding up his chest to grip his shoulders, her fingers digging into the taut muscle there. His tongue brushed hers, a tentative exploration that deepened into something more, and she felt a delicious ache in her core, her body arching to press closer. Nathan's hand slid down her neck, his fingers tracing the delicate curve of her spine, exposed by the dress's low back. His touch was electric, igniting every nerve, and she gasped against his lips, her breasts pressing against his chest, the friction sending a wave of heat through her. His mouth left hers to trail kisses along her jaw, his stubble a tantalizing rasp against her skin, and she tilted her head back, offering him the slender column of her throat. He obliged, his lips finding the sensitive pulse point, sucking gently, and she whimpered, her fingers tangling in his hair, urging him closer. His hands settled at her waist, pulling her flush against him, and she felt the hard length of his body, the evidence of his desire pressing against her hip, making her knees weak. The fireworks faded, the sky darkening, but they didn't stop. Isabelle's lips found his again, hungrier now, her teeth grazing his lower lip, drawing a low groan from him that vibrated through her. His hands roamed, one sliding up to cup the back of her neck, the other gripping her hip, his fingers digging into the silk as if anchoring himself. Her dress rode up slightly, the slit parting to reveal more of her thigh, and his hand brushed the bare skin there, his touch searing, possessive. She felt wild, untamed, her body singing with a need she hadn't known she could feel. She wanted him, his hands, his mouth, his everything, right here, right now, consequences be damned. They broke apart, breathless, their foreheads resting together, their chests heaving. Nathan's eyes were dark, almost black, his pupils blown with desire, and Isabelle knew hers mirrored his. "Isabelle," he murmured, his voice rough, reverent, as if her name were a prayer. "What are you doing to me?" She smiled, a shaky, radiant thing, and pressed a soft kiss to the corner of his mouth. "The same thing you're doing to me," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. They stood there, wrapped in each other, the night stretching before them like an unwritten page. The wedding was winding down, the guests drifting away, but for Isabelle and Nathan, the night was just beginning. The kiss had been a spark, a promise, and they both knew where it could lead. The question was whether they were brave enough to follow. The night had woven a spell around Isabelle Tran and Nathan Brooks, its threads tightening with every glance, every touch, every heartbeat shared beneath the fireworks' fading glow. The Magnolia Estates garden, once alive with the wedding's revelry, now lay quiet, the lanterns dimming as the last guests drifted away. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine and the lingering warmth of the low country, a sultry embrace that clung to their skin as they stood in the clearing, their bodies still pressed close from the kiss that had set the world ablaze. Isabelle's emerald silk dress, now slightly rumpled from their embrace, clung to her curves, the fabric catching the moonlight in soft glimmers. Her dark hair, tousled and wild, framed her face, strands sticking to her neck where a faint sheen of perspiration glistened. Her lips, swollen from Nathan's kisses, parted as she caught her breath, her almond-shaped eyes, dark with desire, reflecting the stars above. Her slender frame trembled slightly, not from cold but from the electric current of want that coursed through her breasts rising and falling against the dress's low neckline, the silk outlining their delicate swell. Nathan stood before her, his navy suit jacket discarded on the grass, his white shirt unbuttoned further to reveal the taut planes of his chest, tanned and dusted with fine dark hair. His lean, muscular frame was a study in restrained power, the shirt clinging to his broad shoulders and tapering to a narrow waist, hinting at the strength beneath. His dark brown hair was disheveled, a lock falling over his forehead, and the stubble along his jaw was a shadowed promise of texture against her skin. His storm gray eyes, now almost black with desire, held her gaze with an intensity that made her knees weak, their depths a storm of hunger and tenderness. His hands, strong and calloused, rested at her hips, his fingers digging into the silk of her dress, anchoring her to him as if afraid she might vanish. The heat of his body seeped through the thin fabric, and she felt the hard press of his arousal against her, a silent confession of how much he wanted her. The kiss had been a spark, a wildfire that consumed restraint and left only need in its wake. They hadn't spoken since their lips parted, but words felt unnecessary there. Their eyes, their breaths, their touches said everything. Isabel's heart pounded, her body alive with a hunger she hadn't known she could feel. A craving to know him in every way possible. Nathan's gaze roamed her face, her throat, the curve of her shoulder, as if memorizing her, and she saw the question in his eyes, the hesitation born of respect, not doubt. He wanted her God. She could feel it in the way his fingers tightened, the way his breath hitched, but he was waiting for her to lead, to choose. "Nathan," she whispered, her voice a husky plea, her hand sliding up his chest to rest over his heart, feeling its wild rhythm beneath her palm. "I don't want this night to end." His eyes darkened, a low groan escaping his throat as he pulled her closer, his lips brushing her forehead. "It doesn't have to," he murmured, his voice rough with desire. "Not yet." The invitation was clear, unspoken, but undeniable, and Isabel felt a surge of recklessness, a need to seize this moment before the world intruded. She nodded, her lips curving into a shaky smile, and that was all he needed. He took her hand, his grip firm and warm, and led her back through the garden, their steps quickening with shared intent. The cobblestone path gave way to the estate's grand entrance, where valets and lingering guests blurred into the background. Nathan's car, a sleek black sedan, waited at the curb, and he opened the door for her, his eyes never leaving hers. She slid into the passenger seat, the leather cool against her bare legs, the slit in her dress riding up to reveal more of her thigh. Nathan's gaze lingered there for a moment, his jaw clenching, before he closed the door and rounded to the driver's side. The drive to the hotel was a blur, the Charleston streets a mosaic of streetlights and shadows. Neither spoke, the silence thick with anticipation, broken only by the soft hum of the engine and the occasional brush of their handshakes on the gear shift, hers resting on her thigh, inches from his. Isabel's body was a live wire, her skin tingling with every glance he stole, every shift of his body that brought him closer. She imagined his hands on her, peeling away the silk, exploring the curves she'd hidden for so long, and the thought sent a flush of heat through her core, her breath shallow and quick. The hotel, a boutique gem in the heart of Charleston's historic district, loomed ahead, its brick facade glowing under wrought iron lanterns. Nathan parked, and they moved through the lobby in a haze, their hands brushing as they stepped into the elevator. The doors closed, sealing them in a cocoon of mirrored walls and soft light, and the air crackled with tension. Isabel met his gaze in the reflection, her lips parting as she saw the raw hunger in his eyes. He stepped closer, his body a warm wall at her back, and his hand found her waist, his fingers splaying possessively. "You're sure?" he whispered, his breath hot against her ear, his lips grazing the sensitive skin there. "Yes," she breathed, her voice trembling with certainty. She turned in his arms, her hands sliding up his chest, and kissed him a deep, urgent kiss that tasted of wine and longing. His hands roamed her back, pulling her flush against him, and she felt the hard length of his body, the evidence of his desire pressing against her hip. The elevator dinged, the doors sliding open, and they stumbled out, their lips barely parting as they moved down the hall to his room. The door to Nathan's suite clicked shut behind them, the sound a soft punctuation in the charged silence. The room was elegant, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, moonlight streaming in to bathe the space in silver. A king-sized bed dominated the room, its crisp white linens a stark contrast to the dark wood furniture, and Isabel's heart raced at the sight, her body thrumming with anticipation. Nathan turned to her, his eyes searching hers, and she saw the question again, the care beneath the desire. She answered by stepping closer, her hands reaching for his shirt, her fingers deftly undoing the buttons to reveal the hard planes of his chest, the taut muscles of his abdomen. His skin was warm, smooth, and she traced the lines of his torso, her nails grazing lightly, drawing a sharp intake of breath from him. "Isabelle," he murmured, his voice a low growl as he caught her wrists, his thumbs brushing the delicate pulse points. "You're driving me crazy." "Good," she whispered, her lips curving into a teasing smile. She tugged her hands free and slid them up to his shoulders, pushing the shirt off, letting it fall to the floor. His body was a masterpiece, Leon, and powerful, with a scattering of scars that told stories she wanted to learn. Her fingers traced a faint line across his collarbone, then down to the V of muscle that disappeared into his waistband, and she felt him tense, his breath hitching. He moved then, his hands finding the zipper at the back of her dress, his fingers brushing her spine as he slowly pulled it down. The silk parted, sliding off her shoulders to pool at her feet, leaving her in a black lace bra and matching panties, her skin glowing in the moonlight. Nathan's eyes darkened, his gaze roaming her body, her slender waist, the gentle curve of her hips, the swell of her breasts, the smooth expanse of her thighs. "God, you're beautiful," he breathed, his voice reverent, and she felt a rush of confidence, of power under his stare. She stepped out of the dress, closing the distance between them, and his hands found her, one cupping her face, the other sliding to her lower back, pulling her against him. His lips claimed hers in a kiss that was both tender and fierce, his tongue exploring her mouth with a hunger that made her moan. His hands roamed, tracing the curve of her spine, the dip of her waist, the soft skin of her thighs. He lifted her effortlessly, her legs wrapping around his waist, and carried her to the bed, laying her down on the cool sheets. The weight of his body followed, pressing her into the mattress, and she arched against him, her hands tangling in his hair, her lips seeking his. His mouth left hers to trail kisses down her neck, his stubble a delicious rasp against her skin. He lingered at her collarbone, sucking gently, then moved lower, his lips brushing the tops of her breasts, his tongue tracing the edge of her bra. She gasped, her fingers digging into his shoulders, her body aching for more. He unhooked her bra with a deft flick, tossing it aside, and his mouth found her breast, his tongue circling her nipple before taking it into his mouth. The sensation was electric, a jolt of pleasure that made her cry out, her hips bucking against him. His hand slid down her stomach, his fingers slipping beneath the lace of her panties, and she moaned, her body trembling as he found her, his touch both gentle and commanding. The night dissolved into a blur of sensation, his lips on her skin, her hands exploring his body, their breaths mingling in soft gasps and whispered names. he shed the rest of his clothes, revealing the full length of his body, hard, lean, and achingly beautiful, and she pulled him closer, her legs wrapping around him, urging him nearer. When he entered her, it was slow, deliberate, their eyes locked, and she felt a connection deeper than she'd ever known, a merging of bodies and souls, their rhythm built, urgent and primal, their moans filling the room as they moved together, chasing release. Her nails raked his back, his hands gripped her hips, and when they shattered, it was together, a wave of pleasure that left them trembling, entwined, their hearts beating as one. They lay there afterward, tangled in the sheets, their bodies slick with sweat, their breaths slowing. Nathan's arm draped over her, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her back, and she nestled against him, her head on his chest, listening to the steady thrum of his heart. The moonlight painted their skin in silver, and for a moment, time seemed to stop, the world holding its breath. They didn't speak of tomorrow, didn't make promises they couldn't keep. But as Isabelle drifted toward sleep, her body sated and her heart full, she felt a quiet certainty that this night had changed her, that Nathan had awakened something she'd thought lost forever. And in the silence, she knew he felt it too. The first rays of dawn crept through the heavy curtains of Nathan's hotel suite, painting the room in a soft golden haze. The Charleston skyline, visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows, shimmered in the early light, its spires and rooftops a quiet promise of a new day. The air was still, heavy with the lingering scent of their night-together sandalwood cologne, jasmine from Isabelle's hair, and the musky warmth of their entwined bodies. The king-sized bed, its white linens now a tangled sea of cotton, cradled Isabelle Tran and Nathan Brooks, their forms pressed close in the aftermath of a night that had unraveled them both. The silence was intimate, broken only by the soft rhythm of their breaths, a delicate counterpoint to the wild cadence of the hours before. Isabelle stirred first, her body warm and languid, every muscle humming with the sweet ache of their passion. She lay on her side, her cheek nestled against Nathan's chest, the steady thrum of his heartbeat a lullaby beneath her ear. Her dark hair spilled across his skin, a cascade of obsidian strands that caught the dawn's light, and her slender frame curled into him, one leg draped over his, her skin soft and golden against the crisp sheets. The black lace of her bra and panties, discarded in the heat of the night, lay forgotten on the floor, and she wore only the sheet, its edge barely covering the curve of her hip, the swell of her breast. Her lips, still faintly swollen from his kisses, parted in a soft sigh as she blinked awake, her almond-shaped eyes adjusting to the light. They were heavy with sleep and something deeper, quiet, wonder, a trace of vulnerability, as if the night had peeled away her defenses and left her raw, open, alive. Nathan's arm was draped over her, his hand resting at the small of her back, his fingers splayed possessively, as if even in sleep he couldn't bear to let her go. His lean, muscular body was a study in contrast hard planes and soft warmth, strength tempered by tenderness. His dark brown hair was tousled, a lock falling over his forehead, and the stubble along his jaw was darker now, a shadowed promise of texture that made Isabelle's fingers itch to trace it. His storm gray eyes were closed, his lashes casting faint shadows on his cheekbones, but even in repose, he exuded a quiet intensity, a magnetic pull that had drawn her to him from the moment their gazes met. His chest rose and fell with slow, deep breaths, and she felt the warmth of his skin against hers. the faint scars on his torso, a map of stories she hadn't yet learned but wanted to know. Isabelle shifted slightly, careful not to wake him, and propped herself on one elbow, her eyes roaming his face. The dawn light softened his features, highlighting the sharp angle of his jaw, the curve of his lips, the faint scar above his eyebrow that she'd kissed in the night's fervor. Her heart clenched, a mix of awe and uncertainty. Last night had been a revelation, collision of desire and connection that had shattered her carefully rebuilt walls. Nathan had seen her, truly seen her, in a way she hadn't thought possible after her heartbreak. His touch, his whispers, the way he'd moved with her, had awakened something she'd buried deep, a belief in her own worth, her own fire. But now, in the stark light of morning, questions crept in. What was this? A fleeting escape? A stolen moment, or something more? She didn't know his life beyond the fragments he'd shared. Didn't know if he'd want her beyond this room, this city, this dawn. She reached out, her fingers hovering over his cheek, then trailing lightly down his jaw, feeling the rough stubble against her skin. He stirred, his eyes fluttering open, and for a moment, they simply looked at each other, the silence heavy with unspoken words. His gaze was soft, unguarded. The storm gray now, a calm sea, and a slow smile curved his lips, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Morning," he murmured, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that sent a shiver through her. His hand tightened at her waist, pulling her closer, and she felt the heat of his body, the hard length of him stirring against her thigh, a reminder of the night's intensity. "Morning," she whispered back, her voice soft, tentative. She wanted to say more, to ask what this meant, to confess how he'd unraveled her, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to his lips, and he responded instantly, his hand sliding up her back to tangle in her hair, deepening the kiss with a tenderness that made her heart ache. It was slower than the night before, less urgent but no less potent, a quiet exploration that spoke of familiarity, of trust. They parted, their foreheads resting together, their breaths mingling. Nathan's fingers traced the curve of her spine, a lazy, intimate gesture that made her skin tingle. "You're even more beautiful in the morning," he said, his voice laced with a warmth that made her blush. His eyes roamed her face, her throat, the sheet that had slipped to reveal the soft curve of her breast, and she saw the flicker of desire there, tempered by something softer, something that looked dangerously like affection. She smiled, a shaky, radiant thing, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, suddenly self-conscious under his gaze. "You're not so bad yourself," she teased, her fingers grazing his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. But the lightness in her voice belied the weight in her chest, the question she couldn't voice: what happens now? Nathan seemed to sense her hesitation, his hand stilling on her back. He studied her, his eyes searching, and for a moment, she thought he might say something, make a promise, offer a plan, give her the certainty she craved. But instead, he kissed her forehead, a gesture so tender it nearly undid her, and rolled out of bed, the sheet falling away to reveal the lean, sculpted lines of his body. He moved to the window, pulling the curtains wider to let in more light, and stood there, his silhouette framed against the city, his nakedness unself-conscious, breathtaking. Isabelle watched him, her heart a tangle of longing and fear, her body still humming from his touch. "I should get going," she said softly, sitting up, clutching the sheet. to her chest. The words felt wrong, like a betrayal of the night, but she needed to say them, to test the waters, to see if he'd ask her to stay. Nathan turned, his eyes locking on hers, and for a moment, she saw a flicker of something regret, maybe, or reluctance. "Yeah," he said, his voice quiet, measured. "Me too." He crossed the room, picking up his shirt from the floor, and began to dress, his movements slow, deliberate, as if giving her time to change her mind. She watched the muscles in his back flex, the way his hands moved with quiet precision, and she wanted to reach for him, to pull him back to the bed, to lose herself in him again. But she didn't. Instead, she slid out of bed, gathering her dress and undergarments, and dressed in silence, the rustle of silk a soft counterpoint to the tension between them. When they were both clothed her in the emerald dress that now felt like a relic of another life, him in his rumpled shirt and trousers, they stood facing each other, the space between them both vast and intimate. Nathan stepped closer, his hand reaching for hers, his thumb brushing her knuckles. "Isabelle," he said, his voice low, serious. "Last night, it wasn't just a night for me. I don't know what this is, but I know I don't want it to end here." Her heart leaped, a fragile hope blooming, but before she could respond, he continued, his eyes holding hers. "But I'm not good at promises. My life's a mess work, travel, figuring out who I am outside the script I was handed. I don't want to drag you into that." He paused, his jaw tightening. "Unless you want to take the risk." The words hung between them, a challenge, an invitation, a question. Isabelle's breath caught, her mind racing. She wanted to say yes, to throw caution to the wind, to chase this feeling wherever it led. But the scars of her past the breakup, the betrayal whispered caution, and she felt the weight of her own uncertainties, her own journey to rebuild. "Nathan," she said, her voice trembling, "I don't know if I'm ready to jump. Not yet, but I don't want to walk away either." He nodded, a faint smile touching his lips, as if he'd expected her answer. "Then let's leave it to fate," he said, his voice soft but resolute. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a pen and a small notepad from the hotel desk, and scribbled something quickly. He tore off the sheet and pressed it into her hand, his fingers lingering on hers. "If we're meant to find each other again, we will. Maybe at another wedding, another night, another city. Keep this. It's a piece of me." She looked down at the note, her fingers curling around it, but she didn't read it, not yet. The gesture felt like a lifeline, a thread connecting them across the unknown. She nodded, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears, and stepped closer, rising on her toes to kiss him one last time. It was soft, lingering, a kiss that held both farewell and possibility, and when they parted, she felt a piece of her heart stay with him. They left the room together, their steps slow, as if reluctant to break the spell. In the lobby, they paused, the world intruding with its noise and light. Nathan squeezed her hand, his eyes holding hers for a long moment, then let go. "See you, Isabelle," he said, his voice a promise and a question. "See you, Nathan," she replied, her smile small but real. She turned, her heels clicking on the marble floor, and walked out into the Charleston morning, the note clutched tightly in her hand. Back in her own hotel room, Isabelle sat on the edge of her bed, the note trembling in her fingers. She unfolded it, her heart racing, and read the words in Nathan's neat, slanting script. "If fate's kind, I'll see you at the next wedding. Until then, you're my favorite stranger." Number 19. Below, He'd written a phone number, a single point of contact in a sea of uncertainty. She stared at it, her mind a whirlwind of what-ifs. Would she call? Would she wait? Would fate, as he'd said, bring them together again? The questions hung in the air, unanswered, tantalizing. A story left open, like a book, paused mid-chapter. As she packed her bags, the note tucked safely in her purse, Isabelle felt a spark of anticipation, a curiosity about what lay ahead. This wasn't the end, it was a beginning. A door left ajar, and she knew she'd carry this night with her, a beacon in the journey to come. And somewhere, out there, Nathan was carrying it too, their paths destined to cross again, or not. Only time would tell. Want to know what happens next? Will Isabelle and Nathan find each other again, or will fate keep them apart? Stay tuned to my channel for the next chapter of their story, where secrets unravel, hearts collide, and the dance of destiny continues. Don't miss it.